We're on? Okay, we're on. Okay, good afternoon, my colleagues. Welcome back. We have joining us this afternoon, we'll start with Madam Speaker, Senator Speaker Tina Munoz Barnes. We have the Vice Speaker, Senator Nelson. We have Senator Clint Rigel, Senator Regine Bescoulis, Senator Peter Terlai, Senator Sabina Paris, Senator Mary Torres, Senator Jim Mullins, Senator Telo Taitigui, Senator Therese Terlai. We have Senator Will Castro. We have Senator Amanda Shelton. I hope I didn't miss anybody. And in the panel, we have the OB staff. We have the director, OB Steve Guerrero. We also have Mr. Ed Byrne, and we have Daphne Simson, the director for Revenue and Tax. And we also have Lester on the line. I believe we're supposed to have Ms. Mendiola join us, but she'll join us as we go along, I would guess. But moving along, I know we left off with Senator Therese on some question with the CARES. A reminder, all our colleagues, the CARES has an impact to the budget, but we're in the budget. We want the answers. We would definitely want the answers from the administration of what's going on with the CARES, the impact, and so forth. But we also have a question that needs to be answered by the speaker. Let's see, where did she disappear to on the screen here? Oh, there you go. So before I ask you, Speaker, to speak, I'll ask Senator Therese to follow up her question one more time, so we can wait for those answers to come in the day or two ahead. Senator Therese.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The questions are related to CARES, but only to the effect that I'm trying to ensure that as we decide what our budget's going to be for 21, that if we can avail of these federal funds, that we set that money aside from our 21 budget if necessary. And if we've got CARES money available, that's why it's relevant. Then hopefully we don't have to take it out of other revenue, and we can use CARES. That's the theory. Of course, we're being told that there's not enough CARES money available, but I think some of these numbers we still need to finesse. And I hate to go forward while everybody's waiting, being put on lockdown without any kind of hope, without giving them some hope that we can find what we might need to find in order to avail of the millions of dollars of federal aid that may become available. And it's looking like guidance is showing, I'm not sure, if I'm reading this right, that, they might not even have to pay that upfront 25%. So we'll see. But the other part I was looking for, Mr. Chair, was to find out that if they had said, when we considered another bill and when we talked earlier, that there might be a money that they, have the discretion to use to pay off deficit or for other purposes, that they might have used it for the Mangafa program, or they might use it for something else. I just wanted to know what those amounts were so that we can consider those as well, either to pay off tax refunds or to pay off, this matching to attain the federal assistance for unemployment. That was the point of my question, Mr. Chair, but I'm going to leave that for now. Thank you.
All right, and thank you. And Lester and Mr. Byrne, if you can try to get the information, I think it was a couple months ago, we did pass override the bill on transparency. We want to see where all the money in CARES and all federal funding, where they at, where are we at, and where you guys are going. And that it's a very simple thing, just what you got, where you spend it, and what's left. That's what we need to know. And then as we're moving along in the budget, we can figure out what we need to do, because it was brought up to possibly increase the budget, or we'll decide then. Okay, Ed and Lester, if you can just follow up on that one, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Yes, just a reminder to the body that last week I forwarded to the body the status of the $1.6 billion in federal aid received to Guam. So you have that information, from last week. So you do have that. And I'm looking at the public law, and there are some steps that have to be taken for the program here under, what did she sign it in as, Public Law 35-94. The rules and regulations have to be put in place. That's still a work in progress. There's an application period, and then there's a sequence of, like things that we need to have understood so that, these payments to the eligible recipients can be made. We're committed to doing that. We just don't have, Section 3's rules and regs, not done yet. Section 4 is the application period, hasn't been opened yet. So we're still committed to doing this, sir. There isn't anything for us to move forward on just yet, unfortunately.
Okay, so if we can just get more in writing exactly what you said, just so everybody can see them, be reminded of what's the delay. Senator Speaker Tina Mooney Barnes, you had a question, you wanted to follow up on that one before we move on?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the previous senator from Jonia, Senator Terlahi, had brought up the question I had noted on in the chat earlier, and it was to both the administration, whether it be Lester or Daphne or even Ed, whether it's 4 million in local funds or the 10 million in federal cares. Can we use this for local unemployment share instead? Just was wondering.
Speaker Barnes?
Yes.
Yeah, that appears to be a moving target. As we discussed before lunch, there's a lot of states and territories who don't have the ability. Joe Messner forwarded something to me from Senator Terlahi, a Forbes article. But even that article doesn't have any finality to it. It's kind of like what if, and it's a moving target. There may be some movement to do away with the state's match, the territories match, but that hasn't come to fruition yet. So I think we all are hoping that Congress will provide some relief again, and that the states don't have to pony up anything, and that additional benefits will come through to benefit, the people of Guam. But there's no finality yet. So I think it's, just incumbent upon us to, as Senator Pito Talahi mentioned earlier, lobby, make phone calls, and try to get our voices heard as well. Thank you.
Lester, Mr. Chair, if I may, can I just have a follow-up? Can I ask Lester, did we even apply for it?
We haven't yet because some of the requirements that you have the wherewithal, we're unable to meet that. So until the guidelines are lifted, the match is lifted, the Stafford Act and the FEMA thing are eased and becomes, something that doesn't have a profound fiscal impact on us, it doesn't make any sense to apply for something we know we can't afford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Lester.
All right, my colleagues, moving along in our discussion, is there any other question we want to pose before we move on? Because we did end in the committee of the whole on page 6 of the budget bill, and I just wanted us to continue discussing the budget bill so that everybody has a grasp of what is in the budget bill, other than just jumping around. Are we okay? I don't see any questions on the chat. I don't see no hands up. Senator, you look like you wanted to ask a question, ma'am.
If I could just ask Daphne one more time. The provision for tax refunds is 100 and oh, did we get the amount from Mr. Byrne that we had asked earlier about how much was supposed to have been set aside or deposited into the fund if they had deposited the percentage required by law? The tax refund.
Yes, Senator, as I said, and want to re-emphasize, this is a notional amount because it's not appropriated. Were the body to appropriate it, I just did an estimate based upon the refunds to the amount of tax that we've taken, and it would be about 62 million.
All right. So, just trying to solve this, I'm going around in circles as to whether, we've got enough money set aside for tax refunds for the upcoming year. The provision is 125 million in this bill. And I guess I just want to ask that one more time, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Shimizu and Mr. Byrne. Is the 125 million sufficient to cover refunds that we will be obligated to pay in FY21?
Speaking from a cash flow point of view, yes, bearing in mind, as we spoke last week, bearing in mind that we get repaid the ACTC. So that is the net amount, and yes, I believe it is sufficient.
Daphne?
And DRT agrees with that as well, based on the history of how much has been paid out. And of course, to Director Burns' point, yes, taking into consideration that we do receive the ACTC reimbursements. Thank you.
And what if we wanted to pay the refunds sooner than 6 months from when they were filed, and we wanted to pay them, for example, in 60 days? That would just affect those, that would be due, in a continuing fiscal year. Would that amount change?
You know what, might I just, so regarding trying to make payments on refunds within 60 days, I'm sorry, and this is not on the cash flow issue, which perhaps Director Byrne will be able to weigh in on, but with regards to the processing, historically, to my understanding, we have been around 3 months, or it could be a little bit more, out in terms of processing. Our charge has been to make sure that we are able to pay within the 6 months. So, we are going through some level of reform in terms of the way that we in terms of the types of returns that are allowed to be filed online. And I believe that, of course, in order to be able to make payments more quickly, the processing of those returns is going to have to also be able to match up with whatever is required. I think that to try to do such thing at this point would be a little challenging, just because, again, of the manual processing that's really involved in terms at this point, Senator.
All right,
So,
yeah, I misspoke. I should have said within 60 days of processing, because I'm concerned about the ones, for example, that you have currently processed. I think over 3,000 currently processed, just waiting for payment. So I'm just seeing if we can alleviate that in the next fiscal year, especially since your processing is going very well, according to the reports. The amount, okay. Never mind, I'll try to calculate that myself, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. All right, thank you. Steve, why don't we go ahead and begin with page 6. We're on page 6, line 6. Steve, can you go ahead and start briefing as we're going to be discussing the budget bill as we're moving along? We're on page 6, my colleagues. I hope you all have your budget bill with you. You're all at home. And we'll just go through the documents, and we're going to be discussing it as we're moving along. Steve?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Okay, so we will continue the revenue provisions, actually administrative portion of the revenues on page 6, line 6. We'll start up with section 3. This is the authorization to pay and prioritize the payment of tax refunds. Imagahagan Wahan shall prioritize tax refund payments for a status A returns for tax year 2021 and prior years in an amount no less than $125 million. Line 10, section 4, suspension of 2% general fund reserve deficit reduction / rainy day fund. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, rule, or regulations, the requirement to deposit 2% of the general fund revenues into the rainy day fund pursuant to subsection 22-436, chapter 22, title 5, GCA is hereby suspended for fiscal year 2021. Nothing herein shall prevent the Magahagan Guan from making such deposit into the rainy day fund as deemed necessary. Line 17, section 5, revenue collections in excess of quarterly collections. A, for fiscal year 2021, the Director of the Bureau of Budget and Management Research shall create a general fund 12-month revenue budget based on revenue estimates in section 2 of this chapter relative statistically weighing of historical collection by month by collection category in the general fund combined comparative statement of revenue report. The report shall be submitted to the Magahagan Guahan and the Speaker of the Lesturan Guahan within 30 days upon the enactment of this act. Line 25, B. For fiscal year 2021, the Director of Department of Administration shall report to the Speaker of the Lesturan and the Office of the Finance and Budget. I'll continue on page 7. Line 1, amount of quarterly revenues collected pursuant to subsection A of this section on the 20th day, the end of each quarter. Mr. Chairman, shall I continue on to the next page or you want to do it page by page?
No, why don't we go to, and okay, we have Senator Tello. Senator Tello, you have a question from page 6, ma'am?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much.
All right.
This is to BBMR or DOA either. On section 4, suspension of 2% general fund reserve deficit and reduction rainy day fund. Is this something that you agreed to with OFB? Was this something mutual amongst both BBMR or the administration and OFB?
Yes.
And isn't it, Lester, sometimes this fund is used to cushion where we can't pay the tax refunds in the past, that this money has been used to pay tax refunds?
I believe we use this for things like retiree medical dental life premiums and things of that nature. But we didn't have this in fiscal 19.
Right.
We put a little bit of money in for fiscal 20, but we stopped because there was a provision in law that allowed for us to stop. So the clarity now is that whatever crisis that arises requires 10 votes of the legislature to tap into this money. So we're not going to be doing anything unless the legislature motions and approves, given the parameters under which this money can be tapped.
And so to that being said, Lester, I mean, like I said, in this money is also used to pay tax refunds in some circumstances in the past, correct? I know you talked about, retirement and stuff like that, but it's also helped to pay tax refunds as well.
We haven't had this, Senator, in place for many years, so my memory's not as sharp as yours. We were unable to actually do this until fiscal 20.
Right, 2019 because of the Trump tax cuts, but we did in 20, and prior to that, 2018, 2017, where there, I'm not as sharp as you are too, Lester, but if I'm not mistaken, we usually have this kind of cushion, and it's been there to help with regarding some of the tax refunds. So, Mr. Chair, my concern here is that cushion has always been there for us, especially when it comes to tax refunds. And somewhere in this budget, we're going to have to address some kind of cushion again to ensure that tax refunds are paid off in a timely manner. And maybe that's something that we can visit, and I have an amendment that we could visit later on, coming in every 3 months to reassess. And any excess revenue that can be generated or that is generated may go to preserving that for tax refunds. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity. And I just wanted to make note of my amendment forthcoming. Thank you.
All right. And then maybe Steve can comment of when was the last time, based on the history, that the 2% was used? Because I know it wasn't used during my last term. If you can give us a little history about the 2%, it's a rainy day fund. It's for use for in case of emergency, and we are all in emergency right now. So, Steve, if you can give it.
Or deficit reduction as well. There's always been
That's
something
correct.
aside, right?
Right. So, Steve, can you give us a little bit of history? When was the last time that 2% was applied?
I believe, Senator, looking back into the records, I think 2018, there was a 2% reserve applied to the appropriation. Exactly what the money was used for during that fiscal year, I'm not privy to it. Unfortunately, I wasn't part of the government of Guam back then, but I'm not aware of anything or specifically what the money was used for. But maybe as an option, you may want to also consider that on the ACTC, when we get reimbursed, that money might be available. If it does come in and we do get reimbursed, it can be used for such purposes. Okay. Yeah. If you go to the page 7 in the bill, there's the provision that the bill indicates about the ACTC reimbursement. It's on the next page as we go.
All right. Okay. Well, let's save that, Steve, until we get to page 7. Any
Okay.
other questions? I know that I see Mr. Byrne had a question. Could I ask why a quality report is needed when it contains the same information as the monthly CRER? Ed, you wanted to pose that question in general. Was there any specific senator that brought it up that you wanted to ask that question?
No, it was my, sir, thank you for allowing me, but it was my question is, this contains the same information as is disclosed in the monthly CRER. So I wondered what the purpose of this particular provision was.
Mr. Chair.
Is there a specific area? Go ahead. Senator.
Okay, Mr. Byrne, your question is a recorded report is needed when it contains the same information. No, I was making a comment as to, to go back to be able to have an amendment that would allow this budget bill to allow us to go back in 3 months to review. I know CRER requires that, but it also says that any kind of realignment or change of funding has to show a 3%, either reduction or an increase for anybody to provide a realignment type of budget. That's not the case here. My case is looking at something with regards to that cushion that's needed for tax refunds. And we've always utilized the 2% or the deficit reduction to tap into that money to pay tax refunds. So if an amendment were to occur, it would be just to reassess on where we are in the standing and if there's any excess revenue in 3 months, or if there's a fall in the withholding tax or corporate tax, that we come back and revisit this, and we don't need 3% to do it. We don't have to wait for that. So that's all I'm saying.
Right.
I didn't make an amendment right now, Mr. Byrne, at all. That's forthcoming. Thank you.
All right. Okay, Ed, we pretty much answered that.
No,
You muted yourself. Try one more time, Ed.
I tend to do that. Pardon my. This is just a reporting requirement. We can do it, but I guess I would ask why it's needed, because this information is already in the CRER. It's just not quarterly.
Okay. All right, Ed. I think she explained that, so we're okay with that one. Why don't we go on to page let's see, we're on page 7 now, and we're going to go on section 6. Steve? Steve, go ahead and unmute yourself first. There you go.
Yes, got it. Okay, well, actually, we're going to go back to line 3 on page 7. That's where I ended off.
Oh, okay. Line 7. Oh, you're in. Okay.
It's section C, line 3. It says, notwithstanding any other provision of law, all funds in excess of the adopted revenue levels enumerated in section 2, parentheses, I, parentheses P of this chapter are hereby appropriated to Department of Public Works for flood mitigation measures and the improvement of roadways, highways, roads, or streets. Line 7, Section 6, additional child tax credit, ACTC reimbursements. A, no less than 90% of all ACTC reimbursements received by the government of Guam shall be deposited directly into the Income Tax Refund Efficiency Payment Trust Fund of Chapter 51, Title 11 GCA, and applied to A status returns. Interest earned in the fund may be used to hire seasonal employees to assist with the income tax processing. Line 13, B, no more than 10% of all ACTC reimbursement received by the government of Guam shall be deposited into the general fund. Such funds may be expended for personnel and overtime for Department of Revenue Taxation, Taxpayer Services Division, Tax Enforcement Division, and the Motor Vehicle Division for driver's license and vehicle registration issuance. Line 18, Section 7, debt service continuing appropriations. The following are continuing appropriations for debt service requirements. A, Department of Education, Series 2010A, Certificate of Participation, JFK High School Project. Total amount, $4,545,050.
All right, Steve, hold off on that. Steve, pause on that
Okay.
one. Is that
Okay.
one of the bonds that we're looking at having it refinanced?
Yes, sir.
The JFK bond?
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Mendiola, maybe you can talk about that a little bit so that everybody can understand that when they refinance it, was the savings and where's the money gonna go when there's a savings? And if I'm correct, it's gonna go straight to DOE to help DOE in their shortfall. Ms. Mendiola?
Yes, Mr. Chair, one moment, please, as I pull up the relevant information. So for the JFK High School project, it is eligible for refunding. There is a net present value debt savings of about $7 million, or 6.8 to be specific. I believe that the scenario wherein the projection was made for the purpose of the bill had to do with upfront savings, which means that when you enter into a bond for refinancing, you have the option to kind of like take out money, sort of, think of it like refinancing your house. You can take out some money to do some renovation, etc. But I believe what was plugged in here by BBMR was upfront savings, so as to, in the current environment of, and the financial challenges being faced by the government, there would be no sort of plugging that money back in for anything else. Although there are other options available, such as, I think one of the options was to install solar in the school. I don't believe that was what was presented here.
Senator,
Okay, but how much savings are we looking at?
Yes, one moment, please. The refunded, let me see. The debt service for 2021 was at 3.77, would have been 3,772,600. The refunded amount would be about 2,224,368. And that would result in a savings of 1.1548,232. Now, I believe with this particular bond, as you can see, there's the insurance and maintenance, which is at 1,568, and that was not assumed to change under the refunding scenario.
Okay, so we're looking at some savings that can go right back to DOE. Am I correct?
I would need to, I think I would need to defer to Lester on the reprogramming of the savings, if that goes straight back to DOE or if it is, I'm not quite sure.
All right, Lester, do you have any comment you want to make on that one?
Yes, sir. Sorry, I got disconnected. Thankfully, I was able to get back on right at the appropriate time. I discussed a very, serious concern with Mr. Guerrero last week. The requirements for A and B on page 7 both the JFK and the hotel occupancy tax bonds. As a course of our commitment to bondholders, we have to appropriate the debt service, the full debt service. So with respect to JFK, it's actually the same amount as last year, where the debt service is $5,131,550. The insurance maintenance is a separate issue, unaffected by our commitment to bondholders to appropriate the full amount of debt service for both of these bonds. This applies to both of these bonds. In the back of the budget, yes, Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely correct. We firmly believe that there are some significant savings opportunities. However, sequentially, we need to appropriate the $5.1 million for JFK, and right now we're at 2.977050. So we're short about $2,150,000, which affects the rest of the budget because it presumes that this money is already available when in fact, sequentially we have to appropriate the full debt service, go through the motions of getting the body to approve of the refinancings which are contained in the back of the budget bill, and then do the bond deal. Only then do we actually realize the savings in this fiscal year for both the JFK and for the hot bond. So my shared concern with Mr. Guerrero, we gave OFB some indicative results of what the savings would look like, but we never really connected on the implication of shortchanging the debt service on the front end. So I believe that it might be an appropriate exercise, sir, to redo this section here and the follow-along implications to the rest of the budget bill, because we're already beginning this exercise with a general fund variance of $2.1 million if we don't stop and regroup right now.
Okay, with that statement, and Ms. Mendiola, can you identify, not trying to go through everything, but which is page 8 and 9, but is there any other section there, such as letters C, D, E, F, and G, and H? Is there any bonds out there that can be all refinanced? I mean, have they reached a period where they can be refinanced? Because we're trying to find some money, and if we're going to obligate and commit to a certain amount of money, but we can see a possible recovery in the months to come by refinancing, that's something that we need to consider up front, not just wait until after we pass this budget and then go in there and says, okay, let's refinance letter C, let's do E, is there anything else out there that in the bonds that can or could be up for refinancing in the very near future?
The hot is up for refinancing, which is
Okay,
item.
you got the item B. What else? We got both A and B. Is that the only one?
That is the only one planned for now. But I can let me take a look at my schedule, and I'll come back to you in a few moments with what else might be refinanceable.
Okay, I think we need to be able to discuss that so that exactly where Lester is saying, in order to continue on, we're going to identify what an additional 2 million. Lester and Stephen, how much more for B do we need to put on that one? Because whatever increase we're looking at doing on the budget, we got to make sure we capture that up front.
Yeah, the variance, Mr. Chairman, for the hot bond is $2,898,113. So it's understated by that amount.
Okay, so we're looking right now with A and B, we're about $5 million, what you're saying.
Yes, sir. General fund is 2.150. And then for the hot bond, of course, that's tourist attraction fund, which is 2,898,113.
Okay, my colleagues, did y'all understood what was stated here? Let me see who we got here on the right side. Okay, we have Senator Tello. You had your hand up first, and then
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. You know, it was mentioned, in fact, that number that Lester just said, 2,898,000, I have 2,898,901. It was the difference of last year, or the 2020 bond payment for the hot bond. And what I did was I noticed it was, you know, 2,898,901 less than last year's. So if I'm not mistaken, this number of 4,098,089 is actually only based on the refinancing. So to be clear, it's actually, or if I 6,089,000 or 6,987,900, right? Is that what, Lester, you were talking about?
Yes, in the 2020 budget, the amount authorized for the hot bonds is $6,996,988. So that's roughly the same debt service that needs to be appropriated for the hot bond in 2021. And then this bond is it is a very good candidate for significant savings, but the call and the financing date is actually in February. So, you know, we're very hopeful that the savings will transpire. This is a little bit easier because as the budget is written, and we're in agreement with this, any debt service savings goes to help fund GVB. So it's not like it's apportioned over 5, 6, 7 different agencies. It's whatever debt service savings we get, it goes to assist GVB. And whenever that happens, it's, you know, it's a lot more straightforward. Whereas the JFK one, I mean, you know, we're talking about $2.1 million for, you know, the general fund.
2.1, yeah, that's also, yeah, the JFK one came at 2.154500 difference. So these two here, so Mr. Chair, if I'm not mistaken, we've kind of counted our ducks before they hatched here, before we even get any kind of savings. So if that's the case, especially on the hot bond, where we take this funding from the TAF to pay for this hot bond, that we have to be true to form and really put 6 million plus, and that means we would have to lower that amount somewhere in the budget of the TAF budget that we've already appropriated out. Is that true, Mr. Chair? Or Steve?
Are you referring to 2021, or you talk, because we're not talking about 2020, so this is moving forward now.
Yeah, exactly. So what we're saying is that the amount on page 7 is really supposed to be 6,900,000 something, and instead of 4,000,098. Now, Steve, if I'm mistaken, then let me know. But you've taken 4 million out of the TAF, the estimated projected revenues of the TAF, to pay the hot bond, which is required by law first to pay it off. So that means that's left TAF to appropriate in the budget to all the other agencies that we've put through. So now I'm hearing from Lester, we should have, you know, I mean, we're assuming it's only going to be 4 million when it hasn't even been realized, is my point and my concern here.
Okay, Steve.
Yeah, Senator, whenever you take bonds out and you identify a fund source, one of the things that the bond holders would require is that before, for the fund source that you identify, that before any funds are actually appropriated out of that fund source, that the debt service for the bonds are secured.
Right.
We did do that. We did do that this year. We did basically appropriate the amount of what we thought would have been refinanced at the time. You can say that, you know, we were kind of like anticipating it would happen, but we've been told since that the actual amount of the bond payment for both of these bonds would have to be reflected in the law. And then whatever savings we realize at the time these bonds are refinanced, then those savings can be realized. the amount that you were citing earlier for the bonds, the bond payment for the JFK was actually $6,995,000. Okay, and the bond payment for the hotel occupancy tax was $6,996,200.
Right, right.
So you take the variance between those two figures, and what's reflected in the bill is exactly the amounts that Mr. Carlson has noted, and that is the amount. That is the amount that we have to insert now in the bill.
Okay, so that means that whatever we appropriated, Steve, from the TAF is going to have to, because now we have to reflect a different number. That's Rick. Okay, so I know it's hard to see, but on the bottom where it says this amount, 4 million, now it's requested that because we haven't refinanced the budget, refinanced the bond, that it should reflect 6 million. And that means we're going to have to go to
No, as we're going forward, we have to adjust. That's what you're concerned.
That's my point.
Okay.
That's my point. Yeah.
It's not going backwards, it's going forward. So,
right.
So noted, Steve, everybody understands we have to make the adjustment, and then as we move forward, we're gonna identify the agencies that end up being short. All right? Not unless we adjust in the beginning our revenue base. And that's where we're gonna find the money to cover whatever. Lester?
Yes, sir. May I suggest that before we end this section here on page 9, that the committee basically endorses, recommends, approves of a general fund and special fund levels, because all of those things drive everything behind.
That's correct.
Gonna appropriate. Yeah, I mean, if we don't agree on the $7 million increase that the administration is seeking, and it appears that we have come to agreement on all special funds with Senator Lee's amendment last week. We still have the outstanding request for consideration, and then I think it would really assist both OFB and BBMR to then, from that point forward, we can adjust our comparatives, because we're working off the same revenue base. Because right now, without the committee's adoption of a revenue base, and then OFB and BBMR doing the allocation, and then that being discussed again before this committee, I think we're kind of like stuck.
Yes, we will be. All right, Lester. I'm going to ask. Hold on, Senator Tello. I have a speaker here, and I have Senator Therese that wanted questions. So why don't we just move along to the next, and then we'll come back to you, Senator Tello. Madam Speaker, you have a question, and you'll be followed by Senator Terlai, and then we're going to come back to Senator Tello. Madam Speaker.
Mr. Chair, if I may, the good senator, previous senator, the minority leader, did ask the same question that I had intended to ask, and based on the comments as presented by Mr. Carlson, I think it's important that we look at what our options are right now moving forward, not because of the interest of time, but because there may be other amendments. And I know that the last we saw, there was like 30 or 40 amendments that were put into this equation. And I think that the revenues is either going to take away or give us the opportunity to move forward. And I think it's important. I don't know if we need to take a moment's recess just to see how we move from here. Are we going to bookmark a motion to keep the revenues in place? Because I know that we can't do amendments right now. Or am I saying this wrong?
No, we're not going to be doing any amendments. We're not going to do any amendments. That's why we're in discussion in committee. We identified, like on page 7, the number on line 20 Or line 23 has to change from the 4.5, Steve. It's what, 6 million now? Steve, well, what's the amount supposed to be, needs to be?
For the JFK bond, the amount should be 6,995,000. Yeah,
That's
6
it?
million. No, hang on. It's 6,695,050. And that's coming from
$50, okay.
from the
Okay,
general
and
fund.
then down below, we're looking
And-
at the letter B. Is what is the amount that should be instead of the 4,098,000? What should that amount be?
$6,996,200.
Okay, and the difference, if you look at the difference of those two, it's about $4 million, correct? About almost
No,
5
it's
million
five-
total.
About 5 million, yes.
Okay, at least that number is mentioned. Okay, and we're gonna bookmark this, but we see, folks, my colleagues, we still have to go backwards now and entertain the total revenue on page 2. Okay, before we move on, I apologize, Senator Therese, but I just noticed on the chat, Senator Moylan wants to discuss for line 7 on page 7. So, Senator Moylan, I just noticed, I was looking at the list. Senator Moylan, where you at? You still there? Oh, there you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this going back to revenue collection for the quarterly collection at section 5. That's started on page 6, but it ends on page 7. We've been discussing, especially to this last point, the total revenue that we will be collecting, and we do have a lot of questions, and we'll probably be going back to that as well. But we have a lot of uncertainties, and one thing that's helpful for us is the CR-ER report. And Lester has previously discussed the CR-ER reports, and we've also asked questions in regards to there's a 3% 3% level when it comes to the government collections in a quarter as compared to the projected amount for that quarter. So I'm hoping to discuss when we get back to the floor, but I just want to run over an idea of a possible amendment, change that 3% to a 1% level. I think this will be really helpful for us to have the time to look at other options we may have. If we're really confident with the budget as proposed, then it should be no problem. But if we do run into difficulties by reducing this to a 1% from a 3%, I think it gives us and the administration enough time to really consider what we must do if that situation was to ever come forth. It just gives us more time. And plus, I'm just looking at FY21 only, just for this budget so it's an existing law, and just to look at a possibly amendment from 3% to 1%. Maybe Lester can weigh in on this and give us his thoughts.
But before we get to that, Senator Moylan, you're identifying a section. You're looking at we're looking at page 7, line 7, which is section 6. You're talking about doing an insert in between 6 and 7. Oh,
Yes.
okay. So you're adding in another discussion.
Right.
Okay. So we'll ask Lester. Do you have any comments you want to bring up on that one? Because that's not something that's there right now.
Yeah, I don't believe that's an appropriate course of action to take. There are variations, as you'll see, throughout the CRERs and fluctuations. We went from a negative $49 million to, you'll see it very soon, to a positive 29 cash flow month to month, and then our projection for the year end is $20 million over adopted revenue. So in the beginning of the fiscal year, we were doing very well, but then we ran into some pandemic issues and a little slippage in revenues, and that would have required all of us to get together and and come up with a fiscal realignment plan when, you know, things just needed to kind of smooth themselves out, and then we all needed to kind of get back into from stay at home to gradually going back out. And you know, throughout this entire time, you had some essential businesses open and some businesses that were completely closed. Right now, we're in peak core 1, but the amount of businesses that are still open are vastly greater than those initially, because we've kind of learned through trial and error what is and isn't essential and required for our residents. So I think the 1% variation, it just seems to be too extreme, because as you can see, just from this fiscal year, we rebounded, you know, and we're doing well, all things considered, from the general fund perspective. And you know, this doesn't this section that Senator Moylan is talking about has no bearing whatsoever on special funds. It is only the CRER, which is only the general fund. So the general fund is healthy. The general fund is you know, can withstand some hits and still come back and persevere. So I'm completely against ratcheting this down.
Thank you, Lester. Again, Mr. Chairman, if we are so confident then, which is a good thing, then I don't see why the 1% would hurt, but it would just give us the cushion for the amount of time we would need if there was the 1%. And the 1% is only for, it's a quarterly, it's not 1% for 1 month. It's the quarterly, and you got 30 days to produce the report or the average out of the quarter. And if it averages at that 1%, then we take action. If it doesn't, then there's no action to be taken. So again, if we have the confidence that this isn't a situation, then I don't see why 1% wouldn't be helpful for us if the situation was to change. Maybe I don't know, Steve could weigh in on that as well.
Yeah, and then if we can get your possible proposals, Senator Moylan, so that we can have it shown to all the colleagues.
It's
they have something to grasp.
Mr. Chairman, it's on the shared drive also.
Okay, it's on the shared drive, members. Okay, Steve, you want to comment to that? The 1, or is it maybe it should be 2, or maybe 2.5, or almost 3, or it's open for discussion.
Yes, you know, Senator, in looking at especially this fiscal year, it's a very unusual year for the government of Guam in terms of revenue collection. As we started out, we started out as a very robust fiscal year, garnering more revenues in the first 4 months that we did, basically in I guess all of last year, and of course. We were able to, you know, rebound to a certain degree. The 3%, I believe, is an industry average. And I think that because of the fluctuation that we have gone through the last several months, still indicates that we're still being able to float, still stay ahead of things, not as much of where we wanted to be or where we were tracking. And I just don't want to put too much of a restriction on the government. I understand the senator's concern, but I think, you know, because of the dynamics of the way the government operates, and yes, you know, certain things can affect it within the 30-day period. But I would just kind of like, I think the present law, the 3% is somewhat adequate, and like Lester said, you know, we were able to rebound when we have to, and still stay within the guidelines, the current guidelines that are provided for in the law.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Again, I appreciate the positive considerations that we could rebound, and this may not be a situation. But I think it will give, though, this body the opportunity, if that situation was to come into play and we were early enough by looking at a smaller percentage, then it's just a matter of legislation, and we can discuss those points if it does come to the floor. So it's not a guarantee that there will be a realignment. It just allows the senators to review a plan for us to consider for possible realignment, because we're going to need some time to set up a special session or something if that was the situation. And I think because there are so many uncertainties, this will help us be better prepared. So those were just my thoughts to introduce this, and maybe we can look at it on the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. We have Senator Therese. You had a question. You'll be followed by Senator Rizzo. He has a question immediately after your question. Senator Therese, you had a question you wanted to pose?
Yeah, well, okay, so we're hearing from Lester that we need to change our debt service amounts here. We need to increase those to reflect the current debt service amounts until later, until we actually approve a lower debt service or those refinancing actually occurs. So that will, of course, offset everything else going forward wherever you program this additional savings to go in this budget. It's already programmed. But my question was, okay, so and then I just want to confirm, because I wasn't able to open the amendment by Senator Jim, but Senator Jim is suggesting that instead of waiting until we see a 3% difference between actuals and projected revenue or adopted revenue, that we can re-examine the budget even with a 1% difference or some other lower figure, and that was up for debate. Okay, all right, and I wanted to go back, so because we were talking, suggesting very wisely that we are going to adopt these revenues so that we can move forward kind of confidently, that we have at least a number to work with. So going back to the corporate revenue, Lester, you both said earlier that despite additional shutdowns with PCOR 1, that you do not foresee a negative impact on our projections for corporate taxes that will be paid next year for the calendar year 2020, which is what they're going through right now. And I guess I'm still having a hard time, just that, it just seems a little illogical that if they're closed their business, they're not able to get as much business as normal, that their collections wouldn't be impacted negatively. I mean, their tax that they pay next year for calendar year 20 is not going to be less than what you've already predicted, unless you incorporated in your predictions, these PCOR 1 shutdowns. So I guess I just want to know, and you had asked us to look at a higher number for corporate taxes. So are you still sticking with that number for BBMR first? Yeah, are you still sticking with the number that you had asked us last week, or does this shutdown change that number of corporate tax revenues that to expect?
Thank you, Senator Talahi. Again, going back to the 2-page handout I provided last week, I provided the body with the actual collections up until the end of July, which was 89.9 million. And then I mentioned to the body last week that in addition, we had collected another 1.1 million. So that brings it up to, 91 million. As of today, we got another $1 million in corporate tax. So we're at 92 million for this year. And I'd like to draw a distinction between corporations and, sole proprietors and other types of business organizations. I think that some of the things that you see with closures, there's a mixed bag. Certainly there are corporations who are shutting down, but there's also like mom and pops that might just be sole proprietors. So the tax rates have to be looked at, a little bit more in depth to be able to understand whether or not somebody is really going to be adversely affected by what's going on in the during the fiscal year. And remember, we're going through a period in time where the tax period is this actual calendar year for next year. And yes, I still feel very confident that the number that the difference between OFB and BBMR is $2 million, and I believe that the tracking and the retooling, the re-energizing, the construction, especially, with the Fiesta renovations and other things that are going on. I could go on and on and on, but I think everybody understands where I'm coming from. I still feel that very strongly that I'd like the body, even if it's in a committee level, that pushes out a substitute bill or a bill as revised by the committee through, as an outcome of these exercises, that the revenue levels are at the committee level brought forward to the legislature as a whole during session. So I'm still asking for that, yes.
All right, and the difference between your corporate tax estimate and OFB's corporate tax estimate in this bill was what amount again? I'm sorry, yeah. Was that
$2 million, ma'am?
Okay, that was
$2 million.
All right, and then Steve, could you just, with this current shutdown, it was not anticipated last week when you put out your substitute budget. Do you believe these current shutdown will affect the corporate taxes that are filed at the end of the calendar year?
Senator, the shutdown is supposed to be for 2 weeks. Our projection basically was done over a 6-month period. To be fair, if the shutdown goes beyond 2 weeks, I'm pretty sure there will be an effect. I mean, it will have an effect basically on the collection for the rest of the fiscal year. However, that I truly believe that and like Lester said, we are already over collections by $6 million. And if he was talking about collections to date, we're looking about maybe another 5 to 6 more weeks of collections before the end of the fiscal year. How much over our current 85 million appropriation for corporate tax we'll get is basically anybody's guess at this point. But to your question, is it going to have an effect? Yes, it will. How much? It'd be very difficult to state at this point. Yeah.
Oh, all right. I guess.
And just remember also, Senator, just remember that, whatever profits the corporations make will be filed next year.
Right. That's why I'm asking you, because they're closed down from, March, April, June, July, whatever, for sure. Right now, August, and right. That's the taxes we're talking about. It's these profits from these months that we are banking on for next year. That's just why I'm asking, because like you said, it's going to be at the end of this calendar year 2020 that they add that up, and that's what we're banking on right now for fiscal year 21. I can't follow the logic of both of you keep talking about, look at how much we've collected this year. We're collecting this year corporate taxes from a very good 2019 calendar year. It's almost irrelevant to what we're looking at for next year. I can't see how we're connecting those two. But I know I went through this last year, but I just wanted to know, because things have changed since we talked about this last week. And it looks to me like, business closures should affect corporate income and corporate taxes. And okay, so both of them have pretty much said either no, it won't affect it, or we don't know by what amount, and we're not changing our estimates. So kind of that's what we're relying on right now, Mr. Chair. All right, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Before I go to Senator Rigel, I just wanted to go back to page 2 for all my colleagues and everybody here. We're looking at page 2, line 8, we have a corporate on our substitute bill, it's 85,402,000. We're looking at Lester, correct me if I'm correct, if I'm wrong, okay? 87,402 is what the administration's basically saying, right?
Correct, sir.
Okay, and then going down to line 9, is there a change based on what we have on the bill? Is there a change on individual or is it status quo?
Individual or fine, sir?
Okay, now withholding taxes and interest, because that was brought up by Senator Lee, what is the difference in the amount?
We're asking for $5 million more than what is contained in the substitute bill, sir.
Okay, 235, 533, 587, okay? Anything else on provision? Okay, and everything else is, we're looking at 7 million more. Basically from line 7 to line 10.
Correct, sir.
Okay, so, and we did have an earlier discussion with Senator Lee where she was estimating approximately maybe about 4 million. Am I correct, Senator Lee? Because you're there, Senator Lee. You brought up, I think, an increase in line 10 withholding to maybe about a 4 million, correct?
Well, I was just trying to get information from both OFB and BBMR to figure out how they arrived at their numbers. We've done our own research and calculations, and it's different from both of those numbers. So I'm just trying to get an idea of the methodology behind how and what assumptions were made behind OFB's numbers and then also BBMR's numbers.
Okay, at least my colleagues, you all have an understanding where the two increases may be. Okay, so Senator Clint, you have a question, sir.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Actually, it was going back to the amendment that Senator Moylan was mentioning.
Oh, okay, no problem. We can go back to page 7, not a problem.
So it was, I think Steve answered my question, but I just want to clarify it. So what my question was going to be was, where did the 3% figure come up with? So basically right now, 3% variance triggers the realignment, fiscal realignment plan, right? But I think, Steve, you said that's an industry standard. Is that correct? Is that what you said?
Yes, that's.
You just muted.
You muted yourself.
Unmute, please.
Try it again. Steve, you keep muting yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Okay, there you go. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I am told, Senator Clint, that is the industry standard.
So like other governments use that or something, or where is that from? Is that nationwide or something, or?
It's a percentage that I when in looking in my information on other states and cities across the United States, it is a common, a normal percentage used by most of the states. Yes.
Is there a reasoning behind it? Why that's picked as a percentage for variance?
I don't know why it was used for government of Guam, because that's the figure that's used in the government law. Whether or not it was taken off from information from other states and territories, I don't know.
Lester, do you have any idea?
Not really sure of the origin, Senator Vigel, but I'm happy to keep it where it is.
Okay, thank you. That was my only question, is just trying to determine how 3% figure came about.
Okay, thank you, Senator Vigel. Senator Kelly, as I'm looking at the chat, my colleagues, I'm going to look to the right and I'm going to follow first the chat, whoever plugs in. I see Senator Jim raising his hand, but Senator Kelly, before I go back to Senator Jim, Senator Kelly.
Okay, Stuart Mossy, Mr. Chair. And, you know, I was writing down notes, so I may have missed part of Senator Clint, so I hope I don't just repeat something that he just asked. But what I wanted to find out was, without that variation, now this is going to be something that they're going to have to figure off the top of their head. They're not going to have actual data for it. Of course, the more data we get, the better. It gives us more tools, but to try to figure out the balance here. So how often in a quarter would OFB and BBMR say that there is a 1% variation? Does it happen nearly every quarter? I just don't have a sense of that.
It happened last month when we released the June numbers. And
Okay.
look what happened in, our projection was negative 1.62, so it would have triggered the fiscal realignment plan because it was both at the end of a quarter and to Senator Moylan's proposed revision, it would have went ahead and triggered the need to reconvene for a fiscal realignment plan. So it last month was indicative.
Right, and that's just in a month, but you've been around for a while, Lester. Would you say that a 1% variation is not that uncommon in a given quarter?
I would, yes.
Okay, and anything different by OFB?
No, he's correct. Lester is correct.
Okay, and then what time, so that we can weigh all this out, what kind of time does it take to realign? If this is happening in a not uncommon way, what kind of time commitment are we talking about for BBMR to do a realignment like that?
Senator Kelly, we went through that exercise in 2018 with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and it was a very, very difficult, very strenuous, very, it was hard. It was really hard because the administration had to come forward and basically state that there wasn't going to be a recovery until we did, X, Y, and Z. And so we put together a fiscal realignment plan, and we went down to the legislature, and it's difficult. I mean, we raised taxes and we cut government expenses. So it was, but it was the blueprint for the 2019 budget. So there was a silver lining to the gray cloud. But I mean, you're not going to ever want to go through one of those, Senator. I'm telling you right now. It's not.
Okay, and I appreciate that. And then to the best of your knowledge, Steve was saying that it's an industry standard. So are there other territories or states or other entities that you know of, governments that you know of, that go below the 3% threshold?
I don't know of anybody that has that conservative of a leash on revenues, but I think that I agree with Mr. Guerrero that it's working out for Guam. When we had the fiscal realignment plan in 2018, all the signs were on the wall. Everybody got hit in the head with the baseball bat. We all knew we had to do what we had to do. If it's a 1%, then we might just have a Chinese fire drill. And then all of a sudden, the next month, everything's fine. And, I mean, I just think it's a little too strenuous and gets you guys down there. And then next thing you know, by the time we get done with the plan, the next month or, the month after had, things had leveled out. It works well for Guam.
And part of what really helps us is understanding the level of experience. So if you wouldn't mind, I have some roundabout understandings of how long you and Steve have worked in the government of Guam. I think for Steve, it's been over 30 years. Is it the same for you, Lester?
Yes, ma'am. I know you keep calling me old, and I'm getting text messages and they say, Senator Kelly's calling you old.
No,
I said, yes,
I've
he
never
is, but that's
said it.
okay.
I've never said it. I turned UMCO last year, so yeah.
I can see people on the screen cracking up. I say, yeah, that's all right. Ma'am, just for your, yes, Mr. Guerrero has over 30 years experience, retiree of the Bureau of Budget and Management Research. I'm blessed with having staff that I have 4 staff members with over 30 years of experience that complements, my experience in the government of Guam. And I'm also blessed with people with over 6 to 10 years, of experience. The young and up and coming, really, really good analysts. So we have close to, my goodness, 200 years collectively of work just here at BBMR. I'm including you too, Steve.
Thank you,
Just
Mr.
Mossy,
Carlson.
it's just really helpful to get some of the information like that. Like I said, for us to just weigh these different considerations out. So just Mossy, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. We have Senator Tello, but before we go to you, Senator Tello, we're gonna let Jim finish off what he wanted to discuss. All right, if that's okay with
Not
you.
a problem. Not a problem.
All right, Senator Jim, go ahead and wrap up your issue you wanted to discuss about your 3% to 1%. I mean, 2% sounded good, 3 is just as good. But go for it, Senator Jim.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I appreciate comments and possible suggestions to the amendment. But the the projection that we're being asked to is to consider increasing our revenue projections by, I think, $7 million or $6 million, and the confidence is being shown that that revenue is available, and the confidence again is showing that we've been doing fine with the CRER, and we've been making it. But at the same time, this body has been having many questions. Senator Therese brought up a good issue as well. We're talking about revenue from FY19, and then we know these corporations are not around in FY20, and we got till December to realize what's really going to happen. The industry standard, well, Guam is, we base ourselves on the tourism, and we have no idea when they're going to come back. We're fortunate we have the construction that continues, but we don't, we can't project on tourism and where everything's going to turn. And that's why I think we got so many questions going on. I just think it's a safe bet if we relook at the 3% to reduce that. And it's per quarter, and it's 30 days after that quarter to submit a plan to allow the legislature to review. And then it's up to the body for us to decide, should we move forward or not? Maybe by that time, then I won't think it will be an exercise not worth anything. I think it will be very important for us to look at. And during that time, if it just does show that we did all right, we came through it, then leave it alone. But if it's not, at least we had enough time to plan for it and take a proper course of action. And I think that's what the people is expecting. We're going to have the exercise, we plan for the exercise, and if we get it at 1% or an adjustment thereof, then we can do something right. So that was my only discussion on that. But I look forward to discussing it further on session floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And
all right, Senator Jim, maybe you might want to change the verbiage from quarterly to just the word 90 days. Because when you apply the quarter, you always have to remember it's October to December, January to March. If you were to apply the 90 days, it doesn't matter which quarter it's at. If it's 90 days that there's a change, then we don't have to wait for the quarter to complete itself. Okay, there's something to consider. Senator Tello, you have a question. You'll be followed by Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, not taking away from, Steve and Lester of so many years, but in the industry and understand, but we're in difficult times. We're in an unprecedented times when it comes to this budget, sitting before us and not really knowing how much longer or inevitable if this pandemic is going to maintain on our economy and our way of life. hate to say this, but we got to, old dogs, new tricks may be needed here, and that is to adjust. And we need to adjust to the times. And the times are sending us a message that, okay, it's not old school anymore. It's a new start, a new way of thinking and adjusting. And I think that the 1% and the 90 days, Mr. Chair, was an excellent suggestion. In fact, after mentioning what I was talking about, I wanted the 90 days, but I was reading Senator Moylan's amendment, and it's exactly the line that I was talking about, moving forward and just doing that kind of adjustment. And the reason why we want to do this kind of adjustment is because we can't get the administration to come to the table to make those adjustments. They ask us to do it. Now is the opportunity in 90 days that when we look at if there is a 1% adjustment that's needed up or down, that we make that decision now. We've cut a lot of agencies that need funding. And this is the opportunity for us to do it throughout the year. If not, then we wait till the end of the year, and then we don't even know what we have in excess revenue. We don't know, where the money's going. Where we find out that a deficit has been reduced. What money did they use to take down this deficit? Where did the money come from? It's our responsibility to hold the purse strings. So if we go every 30 days to adjust based on this, what the pandemic has brought us in front of us, this is the opportunity to do it. Fiscally responsible, that's our jobs. As legislatures, we hold the purse strings, separate branch of government. So I think this is a great idea, and this puts us all on our toes to keep track of projections coming in. So, Mr. Chair, I totally support this, and I would like to see an adjustment to 30 days. And I don't know, Mr. Chair, or Steve, if this section of the amendment that Senator Moylan's talking about, if should be included on page 7, or should it be in a place, miscellaneous provisions? Or, the miscellaneous provisions. Steve, where would you put an amendment like this?
I think we'll leave it on discussion first, Steve, and then Senator Jim and Senator Tello will identify that as we move along.
Okay, so that was one of the questions.
We're all in discussion mode. I don't really.
The other one is,
when you said Senator Tello, so we'll wrap that up on your part. I'm not going to say the administration is not.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm not done. Okay, please. Other than finding out where it's going to go to, the other question I had is when we were talking about the adjustment of projections with regards to the debt.
Senator?
Debt, regarding to the debt, you talked about going back to page 2 to readjust places like the Territorial Highway Fund, the Territorial Education Facilities Fund, the TAF fund to adjust it. We're not necessarily going to be adjusting it going upward, are we? Or is the intent is that, or can we just, what is the intent actually? Do we raise the revenue projections, or do we go back and make additional cuts?
One, Senator Tello. Let me tell you when you're done, okay? Let me make it very clear. I'm the chair. We went from Senator Moylan's proposal, and then we went back to where we identified the amount. We haven't moved forward, so I would be very. Let's keep our calmness now, Senator Tello. Just calm about it now. Now, just relax. We're gonna move along now.
I'm just addressing the part that you wanted to go back to.
No, Senator Tello. You will pause at this point. Senator Lee, you have a question you want to bring up, and then we can come back to you later on. Thank you. Senator Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with what the retiring speaker was saying. I'm not sure that this amendment belongs on page 7 of the bill. It might be better if we consider it later down the line. And I also, I agree that the legislature controls the purse strings, and that's why I question the necessity of this proposed amendment altogether. I have a question for Mr. Carlson, if he's still available. Mr. Carlson, I'm not aware of any provision of law that prevents the legislature from doing spending cuts at a 1% reduction or a revenue deficit. Is it your understanding that at this 1% threshold, the legislature is powered to act accordingly?
You would be asking the administration to put together a fiscal realignment plan for submission and consideration. So ultimately, whatever trigger that has the fiscal realignment done by the administration for consideration by the legislature is what we're talking about here. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have a question for Mr. Guerrero with OFB. Mr. Guerrero, what would a 1%, an estimated 1% in revenue deficit be? Is it the 1% negative variance on the general fund number would be about maybe 7.7 million? Is that correct?
Yeah, if you're talking about 1% of the total 775 million, it would be about
7.75 million, correct? Sorry, Steve, I think you might be muted.
Yeah, the 1% will be based on the adopted revenues.
Okay.
Whatever the adopted revenue amount would be 1% of that. Yes.
Okay, and Mr. Guerrero, what would you say to individuals who might be concerned that when you reduce the threshold from 3% to 1%, triggering that fiscal realignment plan, you might be urging everybody to adjust too early? So if you, let's say you change it from the 3% to the 1%, you might be adjusting in the first quarter too early to really give our government an opportunity to catch up, because we know based on historical data, even based on the data from this recent pandemic, each month is a little bit different, and there are reasons behind that in terms of the deadline for filing and all these other different things that kind of trigger people to pay and to have certain revenue generating at different times of the year. So what would your response be to people who are concerned that raising it from or lowering it from 3 to 1 is too much of a knee-jerk reaction and it doesn't really contemplate the kind of fiscal policy that we want going forward?
Well, I believe the whole provision of law was there as kind of a control mechanism to make sure that the government stays afloat with the revenues it intends to generate, to make sure it generates sufficient enough funds to cover its operation. If you look at the CER report, actually the 1%, we went actually below the 1% in both in March and in May. And then together we also realized it in June. But if you look at so-called the July report, it seems to have, we kind of like bounced back. I don't have the final report for July, but from all indications of what we got, the preliminary draft, it looks like we've kind of bounced back and we're no longer at the 1%. So if the question is it a good management tool? I believe the 3% is adequate, and it shows basically on the trend that we experienced this year. If the trend shows this year that we were constantly below even 2%, and we were just 2% every month for the whole year, then maybe it's something we might want to revisit. But for the first 4 months of the year, we're extremely high. We're 1.5, 1.8, and in December, 3.6 above. And, and like I said, what happened in the last 6 months dropped us below the 1%. But we seem to be maintaining. And by all indications of what revenue collections are, we seem to be maintaining, which is good for the government, at least for the rest of the fiscal year. So,
Thank
with
you,
that
Mr.
said, I
Carroll.
think, okay,
Right.
you're welcome.
I also just wanted to ask, to educate our committee a little bit better, what does the fiscal realignment plan entail? It's my understanding that it's pretty intense work for both the legislature and the executive branch. So if you could just talk about that, because it might seem like a great, again, kind of knee-jerk reaction to some, but it does take a lot of work and a lot of time to be able to pour through this. So if you could just talk a little bit about the process for a fiscal realignment plan.
If you're asking me, I can answer the question, but I think the answer would be better served if Lester answered this one.
Sure, I can ask the question of Mr. Carlson.
You will know the immediate effect.
Right. I mean, so I just, Mr. Carlson, just to repeat, would you characterize the fiscal realignment plan in terms of the process? Is it pretty intense for both the legislature and the executive branch? Can you describe a little bit of that for the committee?
Sure. It's very intense. There just needs to be a calculation of revenues, based upon you're going along midstream, then all of a sudden, boom, something occurs, and you know that there's no going back, and that you have to be able to, suck it up, try to figure out what achievable revenues you can project, and what implications that will have on government operations, the continued ability to pay tax refunds, funding the hospital, funding education, funding public safety. It's a reprioritization. It's like doing a whole new budget in the middle of a fiscal year, and acknowledging that the budget that was in place has to be, no doubt about it, has to be revisited. So you're making that very, very obvious commitment that status quo is not going to happen, and there needs to be a realization of that, an acceptance of that, and then policy from the legislature to address that. So that's where statute calls for the administration to put that revised spending plan together for consideration by the body. And, it's never an easy thing where, Senator Kelly is very outspoken about protecting the agencies under her oversight. So it's never an easy thing, for example, for some of the agencies under her oversight to endure spending cuts. But it's hard for the administration to put something together, but it's just as hard for the legislature to be able to take the time to first and foremost come to some agreement, kind of like what we're doing now, on what revenues will be like and how that affects the current fiscal year, because you're doing things not in a normal course of budgeting, you're doing it midstream, and then what that means. So, the administration's priorities are not always, the same as the legislature's priorities. That's a given, but there has to be a happy medium in order to address this thing fully. So it's nothing I ever want to do again. I'll be quite honest with you. And I'm not being supportive of Senator Moylan's proposal out of laziness. It's certainly not that at all. It's the amount of work and the realization that, oh my God, we're here again. It's not exactly something I want to have on that, right before I go to bed. Either that, I'll never go to sleep.
Thanks, Lester. And just to clarify, a fiscal realignment plan is the action done by the administration. So you don't need us to do a fiscal realignment plan. Is that correct? So we don't need a fiscal realignment plan to reduce the Budget Act because that's in our powers under the organic.
Correct. Yes. So like right now, if you wanted to, and we're doing this right now, for the public, what we submitted in January for the body's consideration is significantly less than what it is we're talking about now. We are really cutting what it is that we have as far as fiscal 20 moving forward. So I hope that's not lost on anybody that, our general fund revenues for this fiscal year were $803 million. We're not asking for 803, so that's on top of a cumulative thing. So you're absolutely correct, Senator. In the course of discussion of this budget, you're certainly going to be cutting in 2021, and we endorse that over fiscal year 20. We fully support a reduced budgetary footprint. And more to your question, a fiscal realignment plan by statute is drafted by the governor and submitted to the legislature. But this is not where we're at right now, where you guys have the ability to prioritize spending, adopt revenue levels. Hopefully we can all be in agreement and move forward.
Thank you, Lester. And Mr. Chair, I'm just bringing these things up because I want the committee to be very knowledgeable of what exactly we might be contemplating in reducing it from 3 to 1. I want to make sure that we understand what we're asking, and if we did have that information, would we, especially with the timing, like if we got this information in the first quarter, would we kind of have that knee-jerk reaction to slash certain things in our budget, and then realizing a few months later that these levels kind of came back up and leveled off? So I just don't want to be having these knee-jerk reactions and not giving ourselves an opportunity to recover, as we've seen these numbers do over the last few months. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Understood. Senator Will Castro, you had a question up there. Follow up to the need for an FRB. Senator Castro.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to speak to the issue that Senator Moylan raised. Last week in the Committee of the Whole, I was having a hard time reconciling how it is we could submit a budget that's higher than even the last fiscal year. I cited two different sets of data. I looked at the individual income tax, and with maybe one or two exceptions that we all agreed upon, that was a wash. We were showing minus. For example, even in withholding taxes, I was able to compare FY19 to 20, went from 22.5 to 17.5. That's a 22% reduction. I'm just looking at March through July. I haven't looked at the July numbers, so I have March, April, May, and June. And I verbalized all of that on the floor last week when I went through the withholding taxes. And then since then, in anticipation of where this conversation might go, I went back and I looked at the GRTs comparing FY19 at 20 and 20. And again, the BBMR director, DOA director can certainly correct me and contact me offline if I'm in error. But if you compare FY19 and 20, we went from 24 million as an example to 21 million in March. That was a reduction of 3.7 million or 15%. And without going into all the numbers for April, May, and June, I'll give you the percentages in reductions. So that was 15%, and then minus 19%, and minus 18%, and minus 15%. Again, that was for GRT. Now, I could see how important the tool is, but I can see how the statute on its face is flawed. It calls for, I guess, a 3% variance up or down. But for three indices upon which our revenue collections are based, if three of the major indices are showing troubling numbers, but in the aggregate, we haven't met the 3% threshold, for me, that's enough for alarm. Now, I certainly agree that the FRP is the responsibility, the fiscal realignment plan is the responsibility of the administration, Mr. Chairman. But that doesn't prevent us from coming to the table and having that discussion with them. I just also want to point out that two of my colleagues are absolutely correct in terms of what makes up the FRP. But we don't have to take action on that. I think the exercise is a prudent step forward in the event things should turn for the worse, especially after July. We don't have to adopt an FRP now, but I think the exercise is worth merit to identify, as someone posted in the chat, what some cost containment and austerity measures may be, what government reorganizational plans beyond what we adopted in the previous legislature already may be in store. I think this is what the people want to see, and I think this is what we, or at least several members of the legislature, exercise in terms of wanting to see as well, that we're moving forward prudently. Again, I'm still pretty reluctant about accepting the budget on its face as we see it, given the three indices: income tax, withholding tax, and GRTs for the period of March through June. But again, I just want to speak to my colleague's recommendation that we somehow, if the administration's not going to do it on its own volition, that we find a way to compel both branches to come to the table and to take the best step forward and just lay this out. Because as the previous speaker, the director Lester mentioned, it was a painful experience, but it was so well worth it. Senator Torres, I believe, was also there, and we had a set of revenue enhancement options that came out of the SES prepared by OFB at the time. And that really, while that was painful, it was a painful debate that really prepared us for the different scenarios. There were multiple scenarios in terms of revenue enhancement. So this was not just a slash and burn. The FRP was not strictly relegated to slash and burn. It was, what can we do to stimulate the economy? At the time, though, the prevailing argument to improve government revenues was taxation. I'm not necessarily supportive of that, but I'm sure there are other ways we can, quote unquote, stimulate the economy, such as what has been hinted at earlier in the conversation in this budgetary discussion, this expansionary spending. I can appreciate that, especially in times of an inevitable recession. But expansionary spending doesn't mean expanding government and expanding government spending. I think would better be served by putting that money in the hands of individuals and corporations to hire people and put them back to work. And there aren't 33,000 unemployed, there are 40,000 unemployed now. And so I just wanted to make that statement for the record, Mr. Chairman. I brought it up at the committee of the whole. I brought it up at several agency budget hearings, and I want to make it known again at this working committee meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Tello, you had a follow-up question you have?
Mr. Chair, my follow-up has to do with the debt service. I don't know if we're still discussing the 1%, 3% realignment. So I'm just waiting for that section to discuss.
No, we're done discussing about the 1%, 2%. Senator Moylan's comfortable with it. We've done that discussion. We can only beat that up so much. Senator Moylan ready to throw is crossed. Okay, we're in the debt service. We're back to page 7.
We're on the debt. Okay, the debt service. So once again, Mr. Chair, my question is, because of the debt service, that we're seeing new numbers now going forward, changing it to the JFK at 6,996,200. You mentioned we would have to go back and readjust whatever funding that funds the territorial, general fund and territorial education fund, two areas. So do we increase this based on this, or do we, just go through the budget and look at the cuts?
Well, I was going to ask that question of Steve. Steve, what is your proposal? What would be? What is your recommendation that you're going to propose, and how do we find that money? Because other than increasing our revenue base, how were you going to consider that?
Yes,
and then we ask Lester that same question.
Yeah, one proposal that we have was that since the potential savings are specific to the general fund and the TAF, the amount required for JFK project of $2,150,000 can be absorbed if we considered Guam, GDOE, and utilize the funding with the appropriation level for GDOE for the 2,150,000 that we're going to need for JFK. We would also look and propose that for the hotel occupancy tax, that since the bulk of the TAF goes to GVB, and I believe their budget right now is about a little over 9 million, that we can identify the 9 million for GVB to fund the 2.898113 required for the hot bond. GVB also will be the beneficiary of any savings as a result of the refinancing of the hotel occupancy. The hotel occupancy tax.
And that's the same with DOE, am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, when you identify DOE would be funding it, they'll get the savings. What's the turnaround? You're looking at taking, because I'm not comfortable taking from DOE, and I have Madam Vice Speaker still here. If you're taking whatever the amount is from DOE's budget, and you're looking at using that money to do the refinancing, I know Ms. Mendiola is still here. And it goes back to DOE, the 2.5, the savings. Is there any additional money that DOE could get from that? Let me try that question with you, Ms. Mendiola, because it's all related to Senator Tello's question. I don't want us to just keep drawing money from people and they got no return from it. It's not fair. We need to figure out another way. Ms. Mendiola, maybe you can answer that question in relations to that changing the debt service part.
So specific to JFK, you're keeping the number consistent with right around where it was last year at the 6.9 million.
Okay.
Then I don't, I guess my answer to that is just, I don't know where, if you had initially thought to pledge that 6.9 instead of 4.5, then kind of go back to what the original approach was, which was to pay the higher amount. But as far as timing of savings or anything like that, beyond the refinance, if you refinance, depending on the interest rate environment, yes, you can realize savings according to that. The savings would be reduced by things along the lines of the issuance, the cost of issuance of the bond. Nonetheless, that would be true anytime you issue a bond. I don't, and as far as JFK's ability to refinance, we can start that process now, so it would be realized relatively earlier in the year, as in the fiscal, as opposed to later lagging behind in the fiscal year.
But Ms. Mendiola, if we take the money, like Steve had brought up, if the money is taken from DOE's budget, and you do the refinance, what is the turnaround and what would the benefit be to DOE? Would they get any extra money at the end of the refinancing? I mean, I'm looking at a win-win for DOE. Refinance, there's savings, they get all the savings.
Well, it's the same, right, exactly. So it depends on what refinancing scenario they choose. If they elect to just take the savings, then they take there's a lower debt service, and then the freed up cash flow can be used for other things. If they decide that they want to keep the payment level that you've budgeted, they can cash out and utilize that for things that aren't necessarily budgeted for here. So it's really the possibilities there for savings, certainly for DOE, and savings early on, because like I said, the timing of this bond is sooner versus earlier in the fiscal year versus later.
All right, and Steve, as you answered the question with the hot bonds that Senator Tello brought up, what are we looking at? Drawing the funding from from GVB and let them pay for it, and then let them get the benefit of the refinancing and keeping the savings? Are we looking at the same thing? It's like a win-win, is what I'm hearing.
You're absolutely correct, Senator, that it would apply to GVB also. From my communication is that GVB's budget is roughly $9 million plus. My understanding is they need approximately about 4.3 million to sustain operations. they would have at least up to 6 million to utilize. And I believe that the refinancing for the hot bond is scheduled for February 21st. So if we can get this all, if we can get all the both bonds, and for JFK, my understanding, the refinancing day on that is October 31st or October 13th. So if we can get both of these bonds refinanced at least by the end of February, we'll look at maybe March or April at the latest for the bond to get through and approved, and maybe have this money back into the appropriations of these two agencies.
Now, have you spoken to the two agencies, DOE and GVB, to make sure they got a buy-in on this as we're discussing it now?
I have not had an opportunity to talk to them yet, Senator, but we can definitely do that.
All right, Senator Tello, you have comments you want to make?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that opportunity. And I think so noted with regards to, get the buy-in for them. I think that's a good idea to let them know what's happening. And we also have on page 158 of the budget bill that incorporates additional funding appropriated to GVB at the end of the fiscal year. Basically, that section 3 that's incorporated, there's some comfort level to that, knowing that they will also receive some additional money on top of what was already appropriated to them. So it's, like you said, a win-win, not only with the refinancing, but as well as the section 3 on page 158 as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Steve, I have a question that one of my colleagues asked is, where did you get your figure when you put it down on, I guess, the DOE thing and the hot bonds, just so that they get clarity of how that number got there, and then all of a sudden now it's changing to more. They just want to know, what if the refinance doesn't go off as projected? What are the worst case scenario are we looking at? And Ms. Mendiola, you can answer that after Steve.
Yes, Chairman. The amount for the JFK and the hot bond that's reflected in the bill was an amount that was provided to us in working consultation with BBMR. So, we were under the impression that these were the amounts that were going to be required for the debt service. Although, as Mrs. Mendiola noted, that in the Government of Guam long-term debt abstract, it does show the full amounts that is being requested now to be reflected in the bill.
Okay, and then Ms. Mendiola, maybe you can follow up with what if the refinance doesn't go off as projected? Or are we comfortable to say that the refinancing will happen? And let me just throw it that way first.
All things remaining equal, now is a good time. The current environment is favorable for the refi of JFK. As for the hot bond, that is projected to be, the earliest we could do that would be February. And so in the event that the financial markets shift somehow such that savings cannot be realized, and this of course would not be feasible, as it would not be feasible to do the refi.
Okay, so in other words, as we're moving along, if the numbers change, the market changes, automatically you just basically cut off from continuing the refinancing. We stay on track with what we got, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm looking if there's any other questions that are out there. Other than that, it's right now 3:31. Unless there's an objection, I'm going to go ahead and we'll recess until tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, and then we'll continue while we get all the folks, Lester and Steve, to get some numbers. We want to know where we're at on some of the information that was asked. And Ms. Mendiola, if you can get the, remember you're going to look at the bonds and see where we're at on the bonds, what could be and might be considered for refinancing for tomorrow.
I can answer that right now. The only one that
okay, great.
Yeah, these are the two that are up for refi. The rest, the next one that'll be eligible will be BPT 2011, and that won't be until FY22.
Oh, still a long way.
Yes.
Okay, and do you have any response to, I did send you a letter earlier in the year about the highway bonds and trying to find ways to help the, Senator Moylan has been pushing for fixing roads, and Senator Tello, I did send a letter to Gita about looking at the market on how we can take care of our roads. Have you looked at that? And maybe you can present that tomorrow.
Okay.
All right. Looking at the list on the side, I know I saw Senator Trees waving her hand. Ma'am, did you have something, ma'am, you wanted to ask before we
just
go into
wanted to
recess till tomorrow?
confirm. Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Mr. Chair. So just to confirm, hopefully tomorrow we're gonna move forward with the assumption that these provisions outlining our debt service payments for the JFK and the hot bond are actually increased by the numbers that we talked about, and that the budgets for then those agencies are decreased by that same amount, and that the bill in the back authorizes any savings from refinancing go to those exact agencies. That language
correct.
is already, yeah. All right, okay, I think that's fair. All right, thank you.
All right. That being said, it is 3:33. We will recess until tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning. Thank you, colleagues, and we will be sending out the Zoom link for tomorrow. All right. Thank you. Have a nice day. Be safe.